Kojo, 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 Kojo.
So no introduction to Barkha. She doesn't need any introduction. And thank you, Barkha, for coming in. One of my ex-bosses, a maverick editor, Avik Sarkar, had once told me, Indian media has produced only one celebrity, and that's Barkha Dutt. I asked Avik Babu, how do you say so? He says, take Barkha to any gathering with any other celebrities and keep her on one side, you see which way people, move and congregate. But this was 20 years ago, but I think Barkha still remains a celebrity, and we'll come to that. How does she reinvent herself to stay at top? Just now, when she was being introduced, they said that she's got 40 national awards. She was reminding us that it's actually 60 and more. And in fact, my joke with Barkha is at some point in time, Lata Mangeshkar refused taking awards, saying she had got too many and Barkha should, also retire. But,
retire?
From awards. Awards, because you're meant for bigger things. Again, that I'll come to. Barkha, tell me, thanks for coming. You are I think the only left of center person who has come here. Why do others avoid these kind of gatherings? Why people from your ilk? You say that you're an equal opportunity offender, but why are others so shy?
Thank you, Sandip, and hi, everyone. Thank you for coming to listen to this conversation. Firstly, Sandip, there is an assumption there of labels, and I have all my life fought labels, whether left or right. I prefer to call myself a free thinker. I prefer to be somebody who challenges dogmas. One of the reasons that I'm an equal opportunity offender is that I don't actually choose camps. I decide basis an issue what my position is. It doesn't mean I don't take positions. I just take my positions when needed, basis what I think about a particular issue. And I think because I'm an adamant, aggressive free thinker, you'd be surprised that I probably have as many people on the left and right who like me and as many people on the left and right who hate me. I think I'm quite unique in that way. And I always say it's okay to be loved or hated as long as you're not ignored. That's all actually a journalist really looks for.
Yeah, Barkha is a celebrity, who not only gets trolled, but anybody who's seen close to her get trolled. Like, I am no celebrity. Somebody introduced as torchbearer. I said, she is the torch, I am the bearer. But even I'll get trolled for having this conversation with her.
So will I, for being here. So that's the point, that we live in such a bizarre sort of time. I always say, I grew up in a very close from here. My father's home is 5 minutes from Sundar Nursery. Was originally a refugee colony called Jangpura Extension.
Right.
And many families that came in as refugees from Pakistan who had lost everything, at that time were allotted small plots of land, and it was a kind of very middle class, salaried neighborhood. And I always remember this time when, you may walk into your neighbor's home and you'd have a conversation about something and you'd never agree. And the conversation would end by somebody saying, some uncle or auntie, "Acha bache chodo samosa kha ke jao." My point is, what happened to the spirit of "Acha chodo samosa kha ke jao"? How did we reach a point where, because of ideological differences, some imagined, some real, we can no longer talk to each other, we can no longer have friends across the political divide? I find this absolutely bizarre and idiotic.
And people get othered or cancelled and
Absolutely,
the rest of it.
and I'm totally against it.
Good to hear that. But glad that you mentioned your dad, Barkha. All of us knew about your mom and how she has inspired you. And after your dad passed away, I see a lot of, emotional connect, and you remember him often. How did he influence you? And what's the points which a lot of us children, when a parent passes away, then you start realizing the influence. What is that about your father?
Yeah. So, just to give everyone here some context, my mother was one of the first women journalists of her generation. A lot of people a certain age remember me from Kargil and often thought I was the first woman to report on camera from the front line. But actually, my mother covered a war before I did, before I was even born. She covered the 1965 war between India and Pakistan. She died when I was 13 years old. So for my sister and me, my sister is 4 years younger than me, my mother was this larger-than-life figure in my head and my heart. And she had influenced, in a way, everything we would do henceforth.
Right.
My father, by contrast, an Air India official who then left to sort of, be almost like a full-time inventor. He liked to invent things. He was in tourism, a little bit of sort of media, but travel-related media. he was a very gentle soul. My mother was the flamboyant personality. My father was the gentle soul. And it was only when we lost him to the pandemic that I realized that, this man had brought up 2 girls single-handedly.
Right.
Very, very progressive father for his generation and even otherwise. We were able to literally go out and be whoever we wanted to. And one of my big regrets, I have many regrets and many points of guilt after he died, but one of my big regrets is that somehow we were so shaped by the idea of my mother that
Right.
we almost took my dad for granted.
Right. My abiding picture of his is you had put up, I think he was making a Meccano. He used
Yes,
to,
yes.
And a very elaborate Meccano. And,
Yes.
But tell me, Barkha, I remember that time you were on the road, in fact, when he was unwell and you had to rush back, take him to the hospital. So that was the period, you were covering COVID, and rest is history, your book, which has been acclaimed all over. But looking back in hindsight, what do you think about India's management of COVID? Do you think now that there's so much data coming out of how other countries fared, how China has done, I was in many of your shows where
Yeah.
you criticized the vaccination policy. What would you say, with the benefit of hindsight?
Well, I think that's an interesting question. And I think one thing that we can safely say is that every country had challenges and struggles that were unique to it. Every country faltered at different steps and then learnt from those mistakes. For example, I've always said that in our case, we learned from every wave. So for example, in the first wave, public transport was shut, right, during the lockdown. I think then when we saw that migrant exodus, which I covered extensively, by the time the second wave came, if you remember, there were localized lockdowns. It was left to the states, but there was no shutting down of public transport. So those are examples, I think, of how, like so many other countries in the world, we were groping and fumbling in the dark and learning, as it's called, on the job. It was on-the-job training, OJT. Now, I just feel that it's a needlessly polarized conversation. How did we do? Now, I'll give you my example. When I first saw, before the second wave hit us, aircraft of the Indian Air Force taking vaccines to neighboring countries, I remember tweeting saying, I feel so proud as an Indian to see this. Later, I realized that these vaccines had gone to neighboring countries on the assumption that the second wave in India would be like the first wave. It didn't turn out to be like that. There were some miscalculations. There was some sort of exceptionalism that didn't sort of bear fruit. And so we hadn't ordered enough vaccines, and this helping neighboring countries had to stop. Now, Sandip, I say to you that if at that point we say that the vaccines should have been rolled out earlier, I think it's a legitimate critique, but I don't think it should be converted into either you're with the country or against the country in a time of crisis. I think the job of journalists is to shine a light on the problems citizens face. At the same time, you have to recognize that this was a global pandemic. So when we talk about uncounted deaths, yes, there have been uncounted deaths in India, but so have there been in the United States of America. People have said, oh, Washington Post and New York Times didn't write about it. It's not true. Washington Post and New York Times also wrote about mass sort of yards where bodies were lying uncounted. So I feel like this is a kind of test question. There's a test question of how patriotic you are depending on how you say your country has performed. No, because I'm a patriotic Indian, because I love my country, I, as a journalist, believe it's my job to say what I see. And that will keep changing. It doesn't remain frozen in time.
So, as you said, it gets recalibrated both for the government, the people,
Sure.
how people react to the
Sure.
whole thing. I remember all of us were paranoid at the first wave to even step out of the house, but now we are far more confident, and same would apply to journalists. But do you think, Barkha, that, India got a fair coverage? Or right now, as you say, in hindsight, I don't see anybody from the media world saying, oh, India handled it better than many others.
So I'll give you an example of 2 very different kind of stories I did. One very positive, one critical, right? So my critical story was that I believe that the government delayed, because of this miscalculation of the second wave, the purchase of vaccines. And had the vaccines been purchased sooner, many people would have got their 2 shots much sooner than they did. But when this stabilized, when the supply side stabilized and the sort of way that vaccines were reached, even in the furthest corners of the country. We saw volunteers and community workers going through snow and hail, through forest, over rivers, up the mountains. I mean, I remember writing saying that it's incredible your history or your experience with mass immunization shows. We did the job between the, getting it online and the dissemination, the distribution. I thought we did that effectively. Now, I am the same person. I saw both of these things. I thought one was a very big mistake. I thought the other was a stupendous success. I think as a journalist, I should say both. And I think I should, be recognized for the fact that I said both.
Said both.
I don't want to comment on what other media did because, we all have to do what we think is correct.
No, that's fair. And as long as you say, and that's one reason that you say, but the only problem is we all tend to see today in black and white.
And that is the problem with the public discourse these days. We have labeled people, we have boxed people in. Those people don't fit in the boxes you've put them in. And this is true for all sides.
Absolutely. Now, I started, Barkha, by talking about this reinvention bit, which is something really I admire. You started off as a kid reporter, you grew up with the channel, and then now you have made the seamless transition into the digital world. What would be your message to youngsters among this crowd, or many people who will be seeing us this show would also be looking for cues? Because we have seen, many big names in journalism. Once the umbrella or the label goes off their head, they all falter and they are not able to. How do you manage to do that?
Yeah. So first, 2 or 3 reasons that I left television. One was I got tired of being an employee, and I knew that I either had to reimagine something for myself now or never. I either had to make peace with the fact that I would be a certain kind of employee forever for the rest of my life, or I had to step out and take a risk. 2, I think television for me had started to lose its charm a little bit. There were only these kind of shouting matches between extreme voices on prime time. And I wasn't enjoying it so much. I also felt I was losing my own touch as a reporter. A couple of times you've used the word celebrity in this conversation. I'll tell you honestly, if you ask me how I think of myself, I don't think of myself as an entrepreneur, as an editor, as an anchor. I think of myself as a reporter. What makes me tick, what keeps me alive, what keeps me up at night is the fact that I'm a reporter. I'm crazy for the next story, the next story, and the next story. I felt television had stopped reporting. So that was the second thing. Thirdly, and it's no secret, I had some disagreements with the channel, NDTV, that I worked at. Although there was a perception, again, ideologically, NDTV has been boxed this way, that way. But for me, who was an insider, I felt that some of my stories were censored and I was penalized, though I saw myself as the victim. And so, for me, the working environment, and it happens. I guess it happens in organizations you spend a long time in. I learned a lot from NDTV. As a young person, I gained a lot of everything I learned from them. But as I grew up, we stopped seeing eye to eye on everything. Right. And it was a kind of inevitable, I suppose, growing up that happens in organizations. Some people outgrow an organization. Promoters and employees don't always see the same way. Every journalist here at some point has had an argument with some promoter. Lastly, I felt that the content consumption, I mean, how many of us even watch TV on TV anymore?
Right.
We're all watching content on our phones. And so I felt like I wanted to take this chance. I am proud to say that our platform Mojo means magic, has been built. What has it been built on? It's only been built on pure hard work, reporting, good conversation, good interviews. You've been on some of our shows. We try very hard to not be chamcha or morcha. You know that's one of my phrases, that I think the problem with the media today is that you're either sycophantic or you're activist. I want to be neither. And we try very hard to retain that spirit on our platform. We've got to 900,000 subscribers. We're awaiting our 1 million threshold. And I think we've done it without taking sides. And I'm proud of that.
No, that's fantastic. And I think there's a lot of lesson for youngsters today, with the churn going on in media. When things happen, there is displacement. What do people do next? Whether they venture on their own or get into YouTube, or they look for another channel. But when you talk of chamcha and morcha, it's a matter of perception. People on the other side will think you are very much part of the morcha, maybe a sophisticated morcha than others. But do you think the morcha is also fair to you? Because I'll ask you a very pointed question. and this is not about personalities.
Yeah.
I know you are still kind of haunted or hunted for the Radia days and Radia tapes, whereas there are a lot of other, issues which happened lately in the last 1 year, which in the Morcha world, which seem to have been just buried under the carpet. What would be your reaction to that?
So I'll tell you, the Radia tapes is an issue that has been used to selectively attack me both by the left and the right. So that's one point. And I said to somebody recently, when there was a recent controversy in what you would call the Morcha world, I said that it's been, 10, 11, 12 years? Yeah. I'm still asked this question. And here, in the sort of activist space, if you ask a question within 10 days of something happening, they'll say, why are you going on and on about it? So certainly there is this sort of double speak. But equally, Sandip, it exists on the Chamcha side also. In the Chamcha side also, there were people who were embroiled in the same sort of so-called controversy. They have been forgiven because they've taken a side that their base likes. This side has been forgiven, so-called forgiven. We'll have another conversation one day on, I actually think I was a victim of that entire issue and not at all a perpetrator. I was just too young and too taken aback, I think, to respond in the way that I might today as I've sort of grown up. But the point is that both ideological camps have used this issue selectively to target the people they want to and protect the people they want to. It's a non-issue. It just points to the polarized reality of our time.
And I suppose it gets back to the professional values of that whatever you do it with rigor and do it with professionalism rather than you do it with an agenda when you're not really doing your due diligence.
But isn't the problem that both sides accuse the other of an agenda? And the point is the toughest space today is, I think, for people like me, I dare say, who don't want to be identified by these sides. We don't want to be boxed in. And what happens there is like, if this is a gathering that is seen as right of center, and if I were to go to a gathering that is seen as left of center, trust me, the questions that would be asked to me will be as tough in both centers.
Anyway, I'm not being tough. Everybody would say
you know what I mean. You know what I mean.
No, anyway. No, that's the point. So, Barkha, coming back to the awards we were talking about, what next? Pulitzer or Nobel? What are you?
One of the unfair things, and this is where I really want India to change the symmetry of how the world looks at us. One of the things that really bothers me is the Pulitzer is the most highly regarded prize in journalism, right? But I'm not sure how many of you know that you can only apply to it if you're an American citizen or an American media organization. So that is very unfair to me. I think I did some of the best work of my life in the last 2 years, right? But I can't apply for, or I can't be considered for the Pulitzer because I'm not American and my organization is not American. And one of the things that really bothers me is this asymmetry of power. We have always, there are great things to learn. I studied in an American university at Columbia. I write partially a column. I write for Indian newspapers also. I write for the Washington Post. But one of the things that really bothers me is that the world's biggest awards are still recognized to be located in the West. And we need to create, maybe with the exception of the Max Essay, which is closer home, but we need to create awards and recognitions of stature that emerge from our part of the world.
So that's a very interesting point, and that's what I was going to ask you next. That you've done the Padmas and been there and all that. If, let's say, the present government were to institute an award like this and offers you that award, would you accept it?
Why not? I don't think I got my Padma Shri from the UPA, and I would not think I get, if I ever did, an award from the BJP. I believe in the Indian state. The Indian state is bigger than any government. This is not Sonia Gandhi or Narendra Modi's India. This is our India. This country belongs to all of us. The state is supreme. I believe in the constitution and the symbols of the Indian state. So why not?
So what about award opposite which people did? Did you support?
Everybody has to navigate their relationship with the state, with the government of the day, with institutions of power in their own way, right? We've had that idea of award Vapsi from the time of Khushwant Singh, right? This is not the first time that this has happened. This is not the first government with which there will be people who will feel that. I see the state, I have to underline this, I see India as larger than any government. I see my compact as a citizen with the state as larger than who I vote for. And I see these recognitions as coming from the Indian state. They are given to you by constitutionally held positions, and those transcend who you vote for at the ballot box.
Last question, Barkha. I'll stick to the time limit. How do you think this government could have related more to journalists of your ilk? I recall you at some point in time saying that they cut off access, which is not fair.
Yeah.
They don't reach out. You think they could do something more differently to get...
I do think that there is a access journalism is used as a bad phrase. Okay. I just want to contest that idea, because the thing is, journalists need to go into government buildings and meet people to do our job at one level. We need to do it, right? So I'll give you an example from the American polarized environment, where Donald Trump as president would get into regular battles with the White House press corps. And one day he got so angry, he cut off the access to the CNN correspondent who would routinely stand up and argue with him. And do you know, the entire press corps, where Fox and CNN may not have been ideological compatriots, MSNBC may not have seen eye to eye with Fox or CNN, but the entire press corps was united in saying, we will boycott your press conferences till you restore the credentials of the CNN reporter. Now, one, unfortunately, our media has no such unity. We just don't stand up for each other enough. That's the first point. Secondly, it is important to have access. I've had a PIB card for many, many years now. If you're going to curtail my walking into a government building, my meeting a source, you're stopping me from doing my job. So yes, I will say every politician of any party wants to control journalists. There will always be an adversarial relationship, and there should be, between journalists and governments, right? But that doesn't mean that you can't meet each other, have a civil conversation, agree to disagree, and I would certainly urge this government to be less adversarial and less sort of ideological, in sometimes real, sometimes imagined, in how it interacts with journalists.
Thank you, Barkha. That's been wonderful, and thanks so much for...
Thank you.
Yeah, despite everything, coming over. And it's been my pleasure, and I'm sure the audience enjoyed it, though it's a brief interaction. Thank you very much for being a lovely audience and letting me be the troll without giving you a chance to. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandip. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you.
Kojo, kojo. Kojo, kojo. Kojo, kojo.